Welcome in, everybody. You ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Well, let me tell you, you've really outdone yourself this time with these source documents.
Oh, yeah.
This is on the Kyron Horman case. And you sent us legal documents from 2010,
Wow.
which is 5 years before all that media stuff that you were mentioning.
Right.
So we're talking about a missing child here, a possible murder for hire plot, and a whole lot of questions around his stepmom, Terry.
Absolutely.
Heavy stuff, but as always, we're going to stick strictly to the facts in these documents.
For sure.
No speculation, no personal opinions.
Right.
Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts.
Just the facts.
And one of the things that makes these documents so interesting is the timing.
Uh-huh.
They're not from right after Kyron disappeared, on June 4th, 2010.
Right.
They come out just a few weeks later, June 28th, when Kyron's dad, Kane,
Yeah.
files for divorce and a restraining order against Tara.
Yeah, it's like this bomb just drops in the middle of what's already a really chaotic and heartbreaking situation.
Total bomb. Like you said, and you know me, I love a detective story.
Right.
So rewind a bit and set the stage for our listeners.
Sure.
Kyron vanishes from Skyline Elementary, and weeks later, bam, these explosive legal documents.
Exactly.
What exactly was Kane alleging in that restraining order?
Well, he outlined some really serious concerns. He claims that Terry had actually tried to hire someone to kill him.
Wow.
And he expresses real fear for Kyron's safety and directly links Tyrion to that potential threat.
So this is all happening while the nation is, glued to the news, hoping desperately for Kyron's safe return.
Exactly. It's just this added layer of intensity.
I can't even imagine what must have been going through Kane's mind at that time,
Yeah.
dealing with the disappearance of your child and then accusing your spouse of something so horrific.
Right.
It's just unfathomable. And this restraining order wasn't just about keeping Terry away from Kane, was it?
No, it wasn't. It actually specifically prohibited her from having any contact with Kiara,
Kiara.
their daughter.
Oh, their daughter.
Okay, right. And that's where things get even more complicated. Because the custody battle over Kiara really becomes a major part of these documents.
Yeah, you flagged this part in your notes.
I did.
And it's such a head-scratcher because in his affidavit, Kane claims that he was Kiara's primary caregiver.
Right.
And he sort of paints this picture of Terry as struggling with alcohol abuse and how that was impacting their daughter.
Right.
But then Terry's lawyer comes back swinging
Yeah.
and says, no, she was the one who was primarily caring for Kiara.
It's a completely different story.
It's totally different. So are they both just trying to present themselves in the best light possible, or was there some deeper tension that contributed to this?
It really makes you wonder about the family dynamics at play.
Yeah. And then things take an even more dramatic turn. What happens with Terry and the Fifth Amendment?
Oh, yeah. So her lawyer actually states that she would be invoking her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination.
So basically refusing to answer questions.
Right. And in a civil case like this, it's kind of like refusing to answer questions in a game of Clue. It doesn't automatically mean you're guilty, but it definitely raises some eyebrows.
Oh, for sure. So she's basically saying, I'm not going to answer any questions that might make me look bad, even if it means potentially losing custody of her daughter.
Yeah, it's a risky move for sure.
It's a huge gamble.
It is. And it can actually lead to what they call negative inferences.
Okay.
So the judge is allowed to consider her refusal to testify when making decisions about the custody case.
So it's like a shadow cast over her credibility.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got a missing child, a husband accusing his wife of a murder plot, a bitter custody battle, and a refusal to testify.
Right. And we're not done yet.
Oh, there's more.
There's more.
Hit me with it.
We've got some pretty interesting text messages to look at.
Oh, boy. Okay, so we're going to get into some eyebrow-raising text messages, but first, we need to take a quick break.
Sounds good.
All right, we are back, and we're diving into these text messages.
Let's do that.
I gotta be honest, these things are giving me chills. It's like reading a diary entry from someone living in a parallel universe.
You know what you mean.
Like, where the frantic search for a missing child is happening, in the background, but their day-to-day life is just carrying on.
It's a really jarring contrast.
It is. And that's what I think makes these texts so intriguing, that disconnect, that lack of visible distress.
Yeah,
It really raises questions.
absolutely.
Like, is this a sign of, cold indifference or a desperate attempt to appear normal
Right.
or something else entirely?
It's hard to say for sure.
It is. We were talking about the Fifth Amendment earlier being like refusing to answer questions in Clue.
Right.
Well, reading these texts, it feels like we're peeking at the notes. Terryman might have been scribbling down, trying to, figure out her next move.
Yeah.
Except the notes are full of emojis and slang and,
Right.
it's bizarre.
Well, it does give us a really unfiltered look into her thoughts and actions.
Yeah. And it's during this super intense period, too, when she's under all this scrutiny.
Exactly.
There's this one line that you highlighted where she says something like, "Gotta get a clean phone just in case."
Oh, yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, it definitely makes you think about, a level of paranoia,
Yeah.
maybe a desire to operate outside of, the watchful eye of law enforcement.
So that term clean phone, it implies a device used to avoid detection or tracking.
Right. And it raises questions about what she might have been trying to conceal.
It makes you wonder, if she felt like she was playing a game of chess,
Oh, interesting.
trying to outmaneuver the investigators.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And remember, she's not just facing the public pressure of the missing child case.
Right.
She's also got this divorce and custody battle going on.
Everything she does is being watched.
Exactly.
So maybe these text messages that seem flippant were actually a way for her to protect herself
Uh,
or to control the narrative or even distract from something else.
it's certainly possible.
Yeah. That's where the analysis of these texts gets really interesting. Because we have to consider so many different interpretations and weigh the evidence.
We have to
Yeah.
try to understand what motivated her words and actions.
Yeah. And then on top of that, we've got Kane mentioning these polygraph tests in his affidavit.
Mm-hmm.
He claims that Terry Sohn failed 3 of them,
Right.
all related to Kyron's disappearance. So what's the deal with that?
Well, you have to remember that polygraph results are generally inadmissible in court.
Yeah, they're not exactly foolproof.
Right. There's actually a legal precedent for that in Oregon. The Frumdahl v. Frumdahl case
Mm-hmm.
established that pretty clearly.
Okay.
But even though they can't be used as, concrete evidence,
Yeah,
the fact that they were administered
right.
and that Kane felt it was important to include that in his affidavit,
Uh-huh.
it just adds another layer of suspicion to the whole story.
So he's basically trying to build a case against her in the court of public opinion.
Exactly. Even if he couldn't use those polygraph results in the actual court proceedings.
Interesting. And then there's this whole thing about a settlement offer
Oh!
that Terry's lawyer mentions in their declaration.
Yeah, they claim there was a reasonable offer on the table. But, there are rules in Oregon about how those offers can be used in these types of cases.
So you're saying there are rules about how much you can actually talk about these settlement offers in court.
Yeah, Oregon's rules of civil procedure are pretty specific about that.
And what was the name of that case you mentioned?
Saunders v. Saunders.
Saunders v. Saunders.
Right.
And that shows how these rules about settlement offers are actually applied.
Exactly. So just because Carrie's lawyer said they were willing to settle, it doesn't mean she was admitting to anything.
Right.
Or trying to make things right.
And ethically.
Yeah, ethically, it's kind of questionable to be revealing details about a settlement offer in a court document.
I can see that.
It might be seen as a way to influence public opinion
Right.
or put pressure on the other side.
Which just adds yet another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
It really does.
Okay. Before we go any further, I just want to acknowledge how heavy all of this is.
Yeah.
We're talking about a missing child. Right.
A family in crisis,
Uh-huh.
and these accusations are just incredibly difficult to process.
You're right. It's really important to remember the human cost of this whole tragedy.
Absolutely.
Behind these legal documents and the accusations and the evidence,
Yeah.
there's a real family that's been shattered,
Yeah.
a community that's left searching for answers,
Uh-huh.
and a little boy who is still missing.
And speaking of that little boy, let's shift our focus back to Kyron.
Okay.
So, given everything we've discussed so far,
Yeah.
the timeline, the restraining order, the custody battle, the text messages, the polygraph test, the settlement offer,
Right.
what kind of picture starts to emerge?
Well, I think it paints a picture of a family that was already on the verge of collapse even before Kyron vanished.
Uh-huh.
There's conflict, there's distrust, and a sense of desperation that you can just feel in the narrative.
Yeah.
And while these documents don't tell us for sure what happened to Kyron,
They definitely raise some serious questions about Terry's actions
Mm.
and her potential involvement in his disappearance.
it's like we're looking at this tapestry
Uh-huh.
woven with threads of, suspicion and secrecy and these unanswered questions.
Yeah.
And each new piece of information,
Mhm.
each document just adds another layer of complexity.
It does.
But that full picture remains elusive.
It's a real mystery.
We're like detectives, trying to piece together this fragmented timeline.
Yeah.
We have these snapshots of events, these glimpses into private conversations.
Uh-huh.
But that key piece, that explanation of what really happened to Kyron, it's still missing.
And that's what makes these missing person cases so difficult, especially when you're talking about a child.
Right.
The emotional stakes are just so high.
Yeah.
And you have to look at every little piece of information, no matter how small it seems,
Right.
and think about how it could be relevant.
Yeah. It's easy to forget when we're, analyzing these documents and poring over the details,
Right.
that there's a real human being at the center of this.
Absolutely.
A 7-year-old boy who vanished without a trace.
It's important to keep that in mind.
It is. So let's talk about those unanswered questions.
Okay.
You mentioned that Terry invoking the Fifth Amendment really stood out to you.
Yeah.
What questions do you think she was so afraid to answer?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
What was she trying to hide?
Yeah.
What was so important
Yeah.
that she was willing to risk losing custody of her daughter?
Right. Was it fear of being implicated in Kyron's disappearance?
Possibly.
Or was she hiding something else, something totally unrelated to the case, but, maybe damaging to her reputation?
It could have been anything.
It's like they say sometimes the cover-up is worse than the crime.
Right.
Even if she wasn't involved in Kyron's disappearance, her actions,
Uh-huh.
being evasive, trying to control the narrative,
Yeah,
it just makes her look suspicious.
definitely.
And it brings us back to this question of motivation. What was driving her actions in those days and weeks after Kyron disappeared?
Right.
Was it panic, guilt?
Uh-huh.
A desperate attempt to protect herself?
Could be.
Or something more calculated?
It's hard to say.
We've got the text messages,
Yeah.
asking Michael Cook to lie,
Right.
the clean phone comment.
Uh-huh.
It all points to secrecy and fear of being found out.
It does. And when you add that to the allegations from Kane,
About the murder for hire plot.
yeah, and the concerns about Kyron's safety,
Right.
it's unsettling.
It really is. It's like we're in the middle of a psychological thriller,
Yeah.
trying to figure out what's going on in her head.
But we're missing half the pieces.
That's the thing with these deep dives. We only have the information you've given us, the
Yeah.
documents. There could be other evidence, other witnesses,
Ugh.
things we just don't know about.
It makes me think of those true crime documentaries where some new evidence pops up years later.
Oh, yeah.
And it totally changes the direction of the investigation.
Oh.
It happens all the time.
What if there's something out there, some little detail that could shed some new light on this case?
It's possible.
Yeah.
And that's what keeps these cases so interesting.
Right.
That search for the truth, it never really ends.
Yeah.
Even years later, new information can come out, new technology. Cold cases get reopened.
It gives me hope that maybe someday they'll find out what happened to Kyron.
You never know.
So to wrap up here,
Okay.
how has this deep dive changed how you think about missing person cases? Especially when families are involved in the investigation.
I think it shows just how complex these situations can be.
Right.
It's rarely black and white.
Yeah.
There are so many different perspectives, conflicting stories,
Mm-hmm.
emotional baggage that can make it really hard to see the truth.
Yeah. We're not just dealing with facts and evidence here. We're talking about human behavior.
Right.
Choices people make under pressure.
Uh-huh.
And the secrets they keep.
It's complicated.
It makes you appreciate all the people who work on these cases.
Oh, yeah, the investigators, the forensic experts.
Right.
It's amazing what they do.
It is. And it reminds us to never give up.
Right.
To keep searching for those answers, even when it seems like there's nowhere left to look.
Exactly.
Well said. So to you, our listener, we leave you with this. What are your takeaways from this deep dive?
Yeah, what questions are still on your mind?
What else do you think we should explore to try to understand what happened to Kyron?
Keep searching, keep asking questions.
Keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.